Chapter 35 Trust You. Leila shifts under the blankets, eyes slowly opening. She glances to her side and finds the bed empty. Her heart falls a little as she can't see the man anywhere in the room, but the door to the bedroom opens, and he's holding a plate as he approaches her. Relief floods her as he settles down beside her, handing the food to her. Leila smiles and accepts the breakfast, taking several bites before setting the plate to the side. Ezra tilts his head. Is that all you want? Before she can answer, he leans in, hands on either side of her, and captures her lips in slow, passionate kiss. She returns it with fervor and pulls him closer to her by the shirt. Her hands swiftly find his belt buckle, but he stops her, chuckling. You're so eager, but we can't. She frowns at him and questions as the blanket falls, revealing her chest to him, taunting his form. Why not? His lips find their way to her bare shoulders and trace over the vampire's kiss upon her nape. He murmurs as she leans into his touch. You do eventually have to give the king some of your blood, Leila. She immediately pulls away from him, a troubled frown settling into her features as she tugs the blanket back up to cover her chest. Ezra tilts his head to the side. You do not trust him, he states calmly, watching as she focuses her gaze on the blanket. I don't, she affirms weakly with a drop of her shoulders. Silence falls between the two for several moments. She eventually opens her mouth. I would like to, but... Ezra sits down beside her, his demeanor calm as a quiet ocean night. But what, Leila? She bites her lip and finally blurts. What if he misuses my blood? What if things go horribly wrong? How am I supposed to trust a man who cares so little about his actions towards others? He covers her hands with his own, fingers interlacing with hers. Her cheeks heat up at the action, but she does nothing to stop him. Ezra stares firmly into her eyes and replies with a small smile. While he is prone to being undeniably rude to others, his involvement with the weapons has always been for the greater good. But how? Ezra exhales, pinching the bridge of his nose. His amethyst eyes flash and he explains. Vampires weren't always hidden like now, Leila. We didn't always get along with humans. In fact, mankind was seen as mostly livestock, food for us, but they fought back, hunting us down to the brink of extinction. Millennia ago, though, a pact between our kind and yours was formed. She nods her head but then states, yeah, but it would take more than that to make the two suddenly get along. Back in those times there were more than just vampires to worry about, creatures from hell and the like. Man decided it would rather side with vampires than deal with those monstrosities. Thus came the weapons, the pact and blood. Leila shakes her head in confusion. Okay, but what happened to all those monsters? Technically that means weapons are useless now then, right? How do you get blood? He shakes his head, stealing a kiss from her before continuing. Weapons allow the king to protect humans properly in times of crisis, appearing only when those days draw upon us. She points to herself. So then I was born to fulfill some sort of doomsday prophecy? For a doomsday that's supposed to be happening, it's been rather calm. That also still leaves the blood and the monsters. Ezra sighs. We have volunteers for that, and thanks to a seal, those creatures have been held at bay. She raises a curious brow. Volunteers? People volunteer to be fed on. He chuckles and nods. Believe it or not, we aren't the most bloodthirsty monsters out there, Leila. She frowns and mutters. Being with Ryu puts that in a different perspective. Ezra's eyes flash with emotion, and he pulls Leila to his chest, holding her tight and stroking her hair as he murmurs into her ear. I won't allow him to touch you again. Do you understand? She nods her head against his chest and replies quietly. Thank you. He pulls away, staring into her eyes. She can feel her cheeks heating up and tries to divert her attention elsewhere, but he grips her chin lightly and holds her there. Don't be afraid to look at me, Leila. He responds as he holds her gaze to meet his intense amethyst orbs. She blinks several times, trying to shift her contact to anywhere but his face, and replies swiftly. You're staring at me so intensely. What am I supposed to do but look away? I don't do well with confrontation. Think of it not as a confrontation. You are a beautiful woman. Allow me to see you for who you are, Leila. Fire burns her cheeks and she stammers out, attempting to divert his attention elsewhere. Right. Is there anything else we need to talk about? He frowns, releasing her and sighs. Confusion fills her face and she asks softly. What is it? Ezra responds. There's going to be a banquet tonight. We are required to go. Leila scrunches her nose in distaste at the thought. She hated formal events. They were always so boring to her. She'd much rather be alone with the vampire before her than go to an event such as that. The king will formally ask you for your blood, Leila. A scowl mars her features and she states, "It sounds like I'm not going to be given a choice but to accept his offer this time." The vampire shakes his head. "You can decline the request, but amongst the other council members it wouldn't sit well." Her head perks up at the mention of others and she asks, "Other vampires will be here?" He nods. "The council will all be here along with many invited guests, humans and vampires alike. Denying the king this bounty of blood owed to him would reflect poorly upon the pact made with the humans." She laughs wryly. "Since when did I step into the political scene and owe the king my blood?" Ezra shakes his head. "Your birth spurred another crisis into motion. My lord must have your blood, Leila, to protect everyone." She growls, frustrated with the response, and quickly counters, "I didn't ask for any of this. I was supposed to be a regular college student. I was supposed to just live a mundane life. I'm not." Hot, angry tears fill her eyes. "I shouldn't be obligated to a cause simply because I was born. I will not make you fight. All that I ask is that you give the king a sample of your blood." She shakes her head. "I don't have an actual choice in that, and you know it. If I want to live and escape for you, then I have to fight. He gave me up for a reason we are not yet aware of." His lips find hers, silencing the building worry and panic he can feel through their bond. He guides her down on the bed, climbing on top of her, and murmurs against her skin as he draws a line of kisses along her neck. "I will not let anything happen to you, Leila. Trust me." A quiet moan escapes her and she musters, "I trust you, Ezra." He rips the blanket from her form and responds as she shivers from the cold exposed against her naked flesh, "Let me love you." She blushes but gives a small nod, stating once more as he drags kisses down to her belly, "I trust you." Chapter 36. Banquet for the Weapon. She stares at her reflection, hand tracing over the snowflake mark from the vampire's kiss on her bare shoulder. After their lovemaking, Leila had showered and changed for the ball. She wears a light purple dress, the same amethyst tone as Ezra's eyes, that drapes to the marble floor with a bedazzled sweetheart neckline. The lack of sleeves forces a small frown from her, but she does nothing to resolve the minor annoyance. Leila runs a hand through her locks as a knock comes to the bedroom door and opens, revealing Ezra dressed in all black with his trench coat hiding most of his form. He holds a gloved hand out and replies smoothly with a smirk, "My lady." Her cheeks redden, but she takes his extended appendage, stumbling slightly in her heels, a swear leaving her lips. He chuckles, keeping her from falling, and questions lightly with a kiss to her forehead, "Are you ready?" She nods shyly, "Yeah." Ezra guides her out of the room and down several dark halls until they come upon a large set of double doors. Leila grasps his wrist, hesitating in her steps. The vampire beside her stares down at her, placing a hand to his chest. "Don't be so worried. Relax, love." Her cheeks redden at the nickname. Before she can ponder it any further, he presses on the doors, and they open to reveal the ongoing party. Guests, human and vampire, fill the room to the brim, loud chatter heard over the small string quartet playing off to the side. She ventures into the room at Ezra's side, and he gently squeezes her hand in assurance. Leila responds with a faint smile and casts her scrutinizing gaze around the enormous room before them. Red and gold comprise the color scheme of the hall. Guests are dressed in extravagant outfits in all colors of the rainbow. Some dance to the music with and without a partner. Others continue on with their idle chatter. A circle of women wait at the center of the room, arms outstretched. They're wearing two-piece, red dresses which expose their stomachs. Slits right up the sides of the vibrant outfit bedazzled with gems scattered about the skirt and top. One man approaches the women, taking one by the arm and dragging her to him before he sinks his teeth into her wrist. Leila's eyes widen at the display, but the woman doesn't appear to mind. Euphoria paints her face, and Leila tightens her grip around Ezra's hand. He follows her gaze to the display and responds softly, "Feeders. They volunteered for this, Leila, and they are not in any pain. That I assure you." She nods slowly and questions meekly, "Have you fed from them before?" He turns to her, placing a finger under her chin as he steals away her gaze, and answers honestly, "I am not without my own needs, love, as you are well aware." Her cheeks darken before the man, and he chuckles, only furthering the redness in her face. "Such an open display of affection, Commander Ezra. That is quite unusual for one of your stature." A broad man slinks up to the duo, Ezra's eyes narrowing at the figure. He comments sourly, "Marcus, what do you want?" Marcus frowns and gives a slight bow. "I've merely come to inspect the weapon for myself. Rumor has it you've taken quite the liking to her, and I can see why." His eyes fall upon Leila, and she instinctively moves behind Ezra, trying to avoid the vampire's scrutiny. Ezra senses the discomfort and responds coldly. I will ask one more time. What do you want? Marcus squares his shoulders and poses with a cool grin. I wonder if she knows the fate of the weapons? Her brows furrow, confusion spreading across her face. Ezra opens his mouth to make a retort, but a third form beats him to it. That's enough out of you, Marcus. He whips around in surprise and stutters. Your Grace. Memra greets Leila with a small bow as Marcus scampers off into the crowd and remarks as his gaze falls on Ezra. I trust you've been informed of the arrangements tonight, Weapon? She huffs and mutters. It's Leila, you ass. Leila! An excited voice calls, drawing her attention from the glaring vampire king only to be tackled in a hug. She smiles and returns the hug to Haley. I know it hasn't been that long, but I've missed you. Haley jabs her thumb at Mamoru and continues. This guy wouldn't let me leave the room. She tilts her head to the side curiously but doesn't question it and replies with a smile of her own. You look great, by the way. Haley twirls in her red ball gown and asks, really? I think it's too much, but Mamoru insisted. Makes me feel like some fairy tale princess, which should be your spot. Leila shakes her head but Mamoru cuts in. Are you ready, Weapon? Might I borrow her for a moment, little Ezra? His cool grasp leaves her hand, and he lightly pushes her towards the man. Leila sighs and states reluctantly, let's get this over with. He nods and takes her hand in his warm one. A stark contrast to Ezra's always cool touch. Mamoru drags her to the center of the room with him at her side, calling for the attention of all the guests present. Leila reddens with embarrassment as all eyes fall upon her frame and the king's. She can feel their scrutiny as they pierce her. Mamoru states, welcome guests to a rare but purposeful banquet. It is time to seal the pact once more between man and vampire. Hushed voices roar throughout the crowd. Ezra watches with unreadable eyes, but she can feel it in her chest. He is not pleased. He wanted this as little as she did, but his reasons were different from her own. She is the next blood weapon in line to save man from their impending crisis. We know the long and drawn-out history between us vampires and humans, filled with bloodshed on both sides until this pact was created. More murmurs pass through the crowd, but no one speaks their mind. The king gazes at Leila and remarks smoothly, if anyone has any objections to this formal pact, speak now. Intense silence fills the air, his gaze lingering on Leila's eyes. She meets his challenging stare head-on and remains quiet, but a voice finally speaks up. My lord, I cannot allow my daughter to go through with this. Their eyes break contact and focus on the newcomer. Leila's fears widen in shock at the familiar stranger. Although he's much older now, there is no mistaking it. Her eyes narrow in agitation and she steps forward, questioning hastily. Dad? What in the hell are you doing here? Chapter 37 Party Ruins. The man stands there, somber expression flitting across his aged features. He bows to the king and states, I have remained silent for as long as I could, my lord, but please spare her. She is much too weak to be the next weapon. You involve her in a world she knows so little about. She deserves to live. Mamoru's eyes darken, and he takes a step towards the parent. Leila holds her hand out in front of him, though halting his actions, and states with disdain lacing her voice, you disappear for 12 years, suddenly pop back up and expect me to just listen to you? You have some nerve. His eyes widen and he asks, pointing a finger at the king, has he told you that you will die if you take up this fight? You are the blood weapon, a sacrifice to the summoning. Her lips tighten, and she turns to the king with firmly questioning eyes. He snaps irritably, the chances of a summoning are slim. I do not require that of her, merely her blood. The older man counters swiftly, your kind would blatantly lie to our faces. The last weapon went through the summoning and died. You would subject my daughter to that. Leila's eyes narrow in annoyance. Before Mamoru can say a word, she quips, you don't get to pass any judgment here. I'm not a child. I choose what I wish to do with my life. He stands still for a moment, jaw tightening, and then replies, you are blind because you sleep with one. Her cheeks redden with fury and embarrassment at her relationship being laid bare. But how did he know? She opens her mouth to respond, but Mamoru beats her to it. Enough. Your daughter is fully matured, as she stated, able to make her own decisions. Let her decide. He turns to her next with calm, collected eyes. Do you wish to be bitten, Leila? Her eyes widen. He had used her name. She faces him with confused orbs before determination fills her honey brown hues. Holding her arm out, she states softly, I give you permission to bite me, but only from my arm. His ruby eyes fall upon the vampire among the sea of figures. He questions calmly, and you? Ezra replies, "What about me?" He holds his hand out and responds, "She is your woman after all. You do not object to this." Leila blushes and she murmurs as Ezra's gaze lands on her. Does he have to say it like that? A small smile forms on his lips as he answers with a humble bow to the king. "I stand by her decision, my lord." Mamoru turns to Leila's father, stating coldly, "It seems you are outnumbered here. Even your own child has decided against your request. I cannot let you have her. Not this one." Before anyone can say another word, he pulls a dagger from his boot and charges forward. He doesn't make it to the king or Leila for that matter as Ezra swiftly steps in, disarming the man and pinning him to the floor with his boot. He coughs, shouting angrily, "Brethren, now is our chance. Fight back and capture the girl." Chaos ensues. Screams echo from the back of the enormous crowd, and fighting thrusts the room into further disarray. Vampires and humans alike begin to flee, stampeding towards the doors as numerous masked figures appear seemingly out of thin air, attacking the mass of bodies and slamming the doors shut to prevent anyone's escape. Mamoru's eyes flicker and he questions coolly, "Can you fight yet, Weapon?" She startles to life and shakes her head. I don't have it under control." He growls and takes her by the arm, commanding loudly over the crowd of screams, "Council members, be rid of these masked vermin." 11 figures rise to the challenge with silent nods and charge the cloaked invaders. Weapons clash, and all Leila can do is watch as the carnage unfolds before her. Her heart races as she feels a tug on her arm, and Mamoru is glaring down at her. "We don't have the luxury to watch. Cool me." His eyes linger on Ezra and he replies, "You know where to find us when you've dealt with this mess." Still pinning the older man down, he nods. Without looking back, he answers as he presses against the man's throat, forcing him into unconsciousness, "I will seek you out when this is done then." The king pulls Leila by the hand. Haley rushes to their sides and replies swiftly, "You can't get rid of me that easily, my king." He chuckles, pulling Leila along as she's forced to watch Ezra's frame disappear into the crowd of fighting people. Mamoru responds as they come to a wall and places a hand onto one of the many bricks. "We will be going to my room. You can get her there, I trust, Haley?" Her eyes widen as the brick wall begins to part, forming an escape route for the trio. "You're coming with us." Mamoru shakes his head, pushing the two girls forward. "I will not leave these people to the mercilessness of these invaders. They clearly care not for whether the guests are human or vampire, attacking both without worry." Before he can utter another word, Leila holds out her arm and replies, "Then you'll be needing my blood, Mamoru." His eyes flicker, and without hesitation, he grabs her exposed arm and clamps down upon her wrist. She winces at the pain as his fangs draw dangerously close to her bone, but he doesn't drain much from her, pulling away a few moments later and turning towards the crowd. He urges swiftly, "Go and protect her." Haley nods and pulls Leila along, the bricks closing up their escape route and encasing them in darkness as the two traverse onto the pathway. Everything is eerily silent. Haley continues to pull Leila as though she knew exactly where to go through this new passage, and perhaps she did. Perhaps she had gone down this corridor in her free time. Leila didn't know the answer, but she follows along. Haley finally breaks the tension. "It sure is dark down here." Leila chuckles but replies weakly, "I can try to make a light for us." Without giving her a chance to respond, she takes her hand from the younger woman and focuses all her energy into her palms, creating a small orb of light for them to see as they walk. Haley comments as she drags them to the end of the path, pushing lightly on a brick. "Looks like we're almost there." As they exit the passageway, weapons are drawn at their throats, a small gasp escaping Leila. Haley squeezes her hand as the masked figures circle the girls. She mutters to the older roommate, "Down the hall and to the left." Her eyes widen. "What?" Haley glances at the figures and states with a grin, "Hello guys and gals. Can I interest you in a game of Catch the Hunter?" Gazes are cast between the group with head tilts, but Haley gives them little chance to respond as she swings a fist for the two holding weapons to them. She shoves Leila and shouts as she leaps on the back of one, dodging the attack of another. "Go!" Tears swell in her eyes, but she does as told and bolts down the hall, making the first left she comes across. Her feet hit the ground as fast as they can until she makes it to an extravagant room, slamming the doors shut behind her and locking them for good measure. Slow clapping resonates behind her, startling her frame. She whips around and stiffens at the sight of the familiar form. "Ryu." He smirks at her but she meets his challenging gaze and asks, "What do you want?" Ryu hands over a jet black violin and bow and requests with a malicious grin, "I want to hear you play. Play as though your life depends on it." Her eyes narrow at the command in his tone, but banging against the door draws her attention. He smirks. Seems they've defeated your little friend. What will you do, Chapter 39, Thank you. Her honey brown eyes flutter open, calm washing over her in slow waves. An arm sits wrapped across her waist. She smiles at the appendage and turns to the owner, who is sleeping soundly. His black hair falls around his face, adding to the gentleness of his slumbering form. Leila gently runs a hand through his soft hair, thoughts slowly pacing through her mind. Despite him overwhelming her as she had asked the night before, the events of that evening leading up to her collapse had never left her. Fear still had a grip on her heart, and she had many questions she wanted answers to. Worry begins to settle within her chest the more she ponders. What happened to the guests? What about her arms? They were no longer that deathly black color, but she could still vividly recall the tone of her skin from that moment when she played the disintegrated violin. What had Ryu done to her? She needed to know. She takes a small breath, trying to calm her nerves, and Ezra questions groggily, amethyst eyes staring intently at her. Something bothers you even this early, love? Her cheeks redden and she releases his hair. Sorry. Did I wake you? Ezra smiles, placing a kiss to her lips, not answering her question and instead changing the subject. What is it that bothers you, Leila? She mumbles. A lot of things, but I guess. What happened to the guests after the party? Did everyone make it out all right? He frowns, rolling on top of her. The guests are all fine, but I think you had something to do with that. What do you mean? He explains calmly. A black light engulfed the area that night, killing the enemy. They disintegrated into a black ash, but none of the guests were harmed. Her eyes widen and she quickly asks, what about my father? Ezra shakes his head, amethyst pools full of solemnity. He did survive, but his wounds are severe. He may not live for much longer. Her eyes narrow and she huffs, muttering softly, then that's his problem, not mine. He leans in, nipping her collarbone, and states softly, you can see him if you'd like. Leila sighs, content with where she is. No, I don't want to see him. I'm glad the guests are safe. Ezra nuzzles her neck, dotting it with soft kisses. I'm sensing more concerns, love. She bites her bottom lip. Ryu? His eyes flash with anger for a moment. What did he do to you? Leila shakes her head and answers with confusion. He didn't do anything but give me that violin, and after I played it I felt so much pain. I remember wishing harm to anyone who posed a threat to us, and then that black light came. I see. He did not cause you harm. She opens her mouth once before closing it with a frown. Ezra's eyes darken and he questions, what did he do? It's just, I think something opened when he had me play that violin, Ezra. The dream I had afterwards and the darkness that seeped into my arms, that isn't normal. She answers, concern dripping from each of her words. Ezra places a kiss upon her lips and states, we will deal with it all together. Comfort seeps into her chest at his words, but a fraction of her still felt the discontent from that nightmare. What would she do if it was more than just that? Something could be opening and she didn't know if it was because of her or not. She exhales, wrapping her arms around the man above her. Leila softly murmurs, I don't want this to turn into something bad. Ezra stares at her inquisitively but says nothing, instead leaning down into the crook of her neck, gently nuzzling her, his fangs grazing across her soft skin. Leila responds quietly, you can feed. You need to if you're going to get anything besides the bloodlust from me. He clamps down on the mark on her neck, holding her hips still as she squirms beneath him, sensitive from the night before. Soft cries of pleasure escape her as she pulls him closer, searching for more. Her hands run through his hair. He tears himself away from the mark, leaving a bloody trail of love down her naked front. He places his head on her chest and mumbles, Gods, Leila, you are simply divine. Her cheeks redden and she replies, you're high off blood. His lips capture hers and he counters smoothly, I'm quite lucid, love. Leila quietly mutters, we should get up. Before she can continue any further, Ezra quickly speaks up as he sits up, pulling her with him. I want to take you on a formal date, Leila. Her eyes widen but she nods shyly, answering, yeah, sure. When? Ezra chuckles, watching as her gaze casts everywhere but to him in her shy state. I've seen you naked, Leila. Surely a date isn't so bothersome. She glares at him and answers with red cheeks, I've never been on a date. He merely responds with a soft smile, flashing those early whites as he stands from the bed, showing off his naked body. Leila flushes, glancing away and questions, trying to divert her attention elsewhere. Why was the king so warm? Ezra lazily slides on some clothes and responds. He controls fire. You may recall that our body temperatures fluctuate based on the elements we manipulate. I am tethered to ice and therefore cooler than normal. The king is the opposite. She nods her head in understanding and asks, what happened to my father? He's being held prisoner in a cell below the castle. You are free to see him with an escort. Leila shakes her head. No, I don't want to see that man. Do what you will with him. He's caused enough trouble. The door to the room swings open, revealing Mamre dressed in casual attire, and he responds coolly, good, because I have half a mind to kill him. Leila pulls the blanket over her frame to hide her nudity and replies with a hiss. Do you mind not barging in? He scoffs. I'm the king. I'll do as I please. Besides, your body is hardly worth looking at to me. She scowls, throwing a pillow at the man. Haley pops up from behind him and tackles the girl in a hug, the blanket sliding from her shoulders. Leila exhales in relief and responds, I'm glad you're okay. Haley smiles. You're the one who was covered in black and fading in and out on us when we found you in Mamre's room. What on earth did you do? I would like to know as well, Weapon. I felt it, whatever it was. Mamre comments offhandedly. Leila shakes her head and answers, eyes downcast. I don't know. All I can tell you is that Ryu gave me a black violin. I played it, and I was overwhelmed with so many emotions. I could sense as much in the hall as we dealt with your father and his companions before they disintegrated into ash. Leila sighs and states as she pulls the blanket to her. No offense, but can you get out? I'm not coming out from these covers with you in here. Haley giggles and quickly takes Mamre's hand, tugging him out of the room as sounds of protest begin to form from his mouth. Leila gives a small smile at the sight, but as soon as they're out, she tosses the blanket to the side as Ezra hands her clothing. Warmth fills her heart, and she states simply, hoping to convey all of her emotion with the words, Thank you, Ezra. Chapter 40. Before it can start, Leila runs a hand through her hair as she gazes at the mirror, contemplating. Did she dare visit the man who abandoned her at such a young age? Not only that, but he had ruined the party with his attack against the vampire king. Did she want to know why he had done such a thing? A loud sigh escapes her. What's the matter, love? She nearly falls over in shock at Ezra's sudden appearance and rambles, a hand placed upon her heart. Don't scare me like that, and I was just thinking about going to see the old man. He places a kiss to her cheek and questions lightly. A change of heart? Leila shakes her head. No, but I need to know why he chose now of all times to show up. Ezra holds his hand out, gesturing towards the bedroom door. I will take you to him then if that is what you desire. We can go on our date afterwards if you're up to it. She nods and takes his hand as he guides her out of the room and down the long corridor. Silence falls between them. Thoughts run through her mind, and she grasps Ezra's hand tighter, intertwining her fingers with his as they travel down several dark halls, passing by numerous rooms, which she guessed belonged to the other vampires and residents of the castle. The walls gradually change from well-kept to dirted bricks the further down they travel. The smell of decay forces her nose to scrunch up, and she responds, attempting to not gag. God, do you bury all the corpses down here? Ezra replies calmly. Prison isn't meant to be a luxury to its guests, Leila. She frowns and answers as they come to a stop at one of the cells of the underground dungeon. Yeah, but still. Here he is, Ezra states as he steps aside, revealing her father's sickly form. He's pale in the face, holding onto his now missing hand. His eyes flitter with life as he recognizes her frame. He grasps the bars with his non-amputated hand and states bitterly, I didn't know my own daughter would do this to me. She licks her lips, ridding them of the dryness that had permeated their encounter swiftly. You're the one who apparently had an army of beings at their disposal ready to kill me and the others. His lips purse. It was for your own good. Leila places her hands on her hips and snaps. You don't get to decide what's good for me. You'd be better off dead than living amongst these bloodsuckers. Her frown deepens into a scowl and she interrogates. Why did you come? He gives a mad and dark chuckle, answering. I came to alleviate you from this blood weapon curse. Death is the only way out. I would have made it painless. Her eyes widen and she steps away from the cell, muttering, You've gone insane. He counters coolly while taking a seat on the ground, coddling his amputated hand. My mind is the clearest it's been in a long time, Leila, but you will see for yourself. These vampires are not to be trusted. She sighs, turning to Ezra and states as she tugs lightly on his hand, Let's go. I don't want to be here anymore. He nods his head and replies, As you wish. Where would you like to go? Leila gives him a small smile and answers, Our date. Ezra steals a kiss from her lips. The man behind the prison cell scoffs and spits. Foolish girl. Leila shakes her head, rolling her eyes and stealing a marble from Ezra's shirt pocket. She throws it to the ground, and without a second thought, leaps through the portal with Ezra following behind her. He questions as they step out into an alleyway. Are you certain you wish to leave him behind? She nods her head firm. He plans on killing me. I want nothing to do with him. Taking her hand in his, he tugs her lightly along the concrete sidewalk. They walk down the street quietly before arriving at their destination for the evening. Ezra holds the door open for a casually dressed Leila and chuckles at her shyness as she quickly scurries by and thanks him. The host greets her with a smile next. She holds up 2 fingers quietly and follows the man to a booth, where he places 2 menus down, leaving Leila alone with Ezra as she takes a seat across from him. Silence deafens the space between them. Ezra tilts his head to the side, watching her and questions. Is something the matter? She quickly answers, her eyes meeting his amethyst ones. No. I've not done this before. He grants her a small grin and responds, just be yourself, Leila. I promise not to make this difficult. She nods her head weakly, unsure of what to say next. Thoughts run through her mind as silence engulfs them once more. Her father really wanted to kill her. What parent would desire that for their child? Then there was the king. She had given him her blood, but he had yet to put it to any use. Did he simply choose not to? What was he planning to do with her blood now that it was in his system? She wanted to trust him, at least for Haley's sake, but there was a part of her that just couldn't. She couldn't place her finger on it either. And finally, what was the summoning? Did she actually want to find out? If she did, would she be forced to participate and forfeit her life like her father had said? Would she become a sacrificial lamb? She closes her eyes for a moment and shakes her head. Ezra frowns and remarks, something troubles you. She opens her mouth to answer, but a scream interrupts her thoughts. People are fleeing from the kitchen area, and a creature comes spilling out from behind the silver doors, a vampire in tow, hissing and growling, reaching for the nearest guest to feast on. Horror fills Leila's chest as she gazes upon the monstrosity. 2 sets of large, dilated eyes scan the room, searching. Several mouths cover its body, and she is uncertain which one would actually do the feasting. Fuzz patches its skin where the mouths aren't present. She glances at Ezra and questions quietly, what is that thing? His eyes are filled with confusion and fury. He steps in front of Leila as the creature's gaze lands upon the girl. He answers grimly, a beast. Before she can question any further, he rushes the being, using his ice powers to put down the creature before it had time to do any further harm to the stampeding guests. He finds his way to the vampire, who is drinking the blood greedily from a dead man, and kicks him into a wall with brutal force. The man scowls, spitting out the blood he had just consumed. Ezra grips the man by the front and interrogates darkly. What hole did you crawl out of, scum? The vampire grins maniacally. Eternal night will soon return to us, my lord. Ezra narrows his eyes, breaking the neck of the man and sending him into a temporarily unconscious form. He turns to Leila and states with a frown, I'm afraid our date is over before it can start. Chapter 41 Promise. She lies there beside the man, naked as day, a small escaping her. What is it? The king asks with ruby eyes searching her brown ones. She attempts to sit up, but his arm wrapped around her waist holds her down. Haley frowns, biting her lip, and finally questions, what are we? He scoffs. This again? I thought I made it clear. Her eyes narrow and she quips, you haven't made anything clear. A heavy sigh escapes her chest, and she casts her gaze towards the floor, pulling away from the vampire, her feet lightly touching the ground as she finally sits up. Mamoru raises beside her and brushes her hair away from her neck, teeth grazing across her flesh as he places gentle kisses. Do I need to make you my queen? Will that prove your relationship status? He asks flippantly. Haley huffs and answers, that's not what I want. He growls in frustration. Then what do you want? She breathes out, I don't know. I guess I just want us to be a couple. You don't need to make me queen or anything like that, but I want more than sex. I'm not one of your concubines. His fangs nearly rip her flesh open as he comes to an abrupt halt and counters aggressively. You will never be one of those women. Haley turns to him, mild confusion roaming her eyes. She asks softly, pain etched into her voice. Why? Is it because I'm human? Will you return to them? He pulls her back down to the bed, climbing on top of her, and answers, capturing her lips in hard kiss. You are my huntress. Would claiming you as my own make you feel better? You tell me you don't need to be my queen. but your body language and behavior suggests otherwise. No one wants a vampire huntress of all things a human to be their queen. She swiftly counters as his lips trails down her breasts and stomach, grazing the top of her core. She sucks in a breath, running a hand through his locks. I do not care of what others think or want as far as my bride goes. If I want a human, then so be it. I make the decision. He crawls back up to her lips and presses a soft kiss to them. He finishes as he rises from the bed. We are whatever you want us to be, Haley. She gives a small smile and nods affectionately, satisfied with the answer. She questions as he dresses in his all-black attire. Where are you off to? He responds calmly. I can smell the blood of a rogue vampire. Stay here. Ezra carries the bloodied vampire upon his shoulder with Leila following behind as they make their way towards the throne room. Once inside, Memoru is sitting in his chair with his fingers clasped as Ezra throws the body to the ground before them. The man stirs, hissing as he comes to with Ezra's claws delving into his right shoulder so that he sits still. Memoru frowns and asks with frustrated orbs, You've brought in a stray. Why? He had a sealed beast with him, my lord. Something is amiss. An eyebrow raises in question, and he interrogates the strange vampire. Where did you get the beast then? The man scoffs and remarks, Did you not feel it, your liege? The first seal is broken thanks to your little songbird. Memoru's eyes narrow as his gaze travels to Leila. She shakes her head and asks weakly, Could this be because of that night? So pathetic. The true king will soon take his place once eternal night is restored. His ruby eyes fall upon the man with no emotion displayed. He coolly responds, waving a flaming finger hypnotically. Is that so? He is free to try and take the throne from me. He hasn't succeeded yet, and as for the eternal night. He rises from his chair and continues, even if one of the seals is broken, the chances of that coming to pass is slim. I, along with the council, would not allow that to happen. The vampire grins maniacally. Humans are meant to be livestock. Why not just sit back and let it happen? Eternal night would grant all vampires access to the world, not just you daylight-breathing monstrosities. Memoru's eyes harden and he states, You rogues and Ryu aren't worth the time. He casts his gaze to Ezra. Kill him. I have what I need. Before the vampire can utter another word, a blade of ice decapitates the man, his body fading into black ash. Leila gasps and looks between the two men. She asks quietly, What now? Memoru stands from his throne and answers, We only have but to wait, Weapon. Ryu will come for you, especially if he truly desires to undo the seals to hell's worst creatures. Ezra sighs. I'm certain the one we saw earlier won't be the last. Care to describe your date then? Leila responds first to the king's question. Nothing much happened. We were talking and then there were screams coming from the kitchen. That thing came barreling out with the vampire feasting on staff and guests. Ezra states somberly, It was hunting her, my lord. Only when it did find her did it cease its rampage through the restaurant. Leila quickly replies, We need a plan. Memoru intervenes. The plan is for you to return to your training and find a means to create your light without the need for an instrument. You are an empath. The violin merely guides your energy. I, however, am unable to access it because you are not strong enough as of yet. Leila's eyes widen and she points to herself. Me? How am I supposed to get stronger? What if we don't have enough time? Ezra replies, pulling Leila to his side. I will continue to train her, my lord. Will you prepare Haley as well then? I'm certain she'll be quite useful in the upcoming battle. Battle? The word leaves her lips in confusion. She shakes her head. What? What battle? Are we going to war against Ryu? Surely you don't expect me to be able to fight him. Memoru shakes his head. No, Ezra, and I will fight him in your place. You have my word that I will not require the summoning. Fear grips at her chest. But the seals haven't been broken yet. There's still time. Memoru's eyes light up. Time is the only advantage we have right now. Go. I need to think. But Ezra tugs on her wrist, dragging her away from the room, leaving the man to sulk in his throne chair. He states after they exit, Everything will be fine, Leila. I promise you that. Chapter 42 Breakthrough. Leila releases a frustrated exhalation, dropping her hands to her sides. Why are we doing this? We know I can't summon the light through these exercises, Ezra. He shakes his head, grasping her hands and guiding her through several calming motions. It has proven to work, Leila. It just requires focus and practice. Think of it as a violin lesson if that helps. You didn't pick it up and know what to do first thing. She exhales again but nods. All right, But how will this help weaponize the light? You need to understand control first before you can simply turn it into a weapon, he counters calmly. Leila sighs in defeat. If only she could do more than simply summon her light. She plops down onto the cool ground and stares at the black ceiling. Leila states with a frown. Everything here is so dark. Ezra settles down beside her, placing a cold hand beneath her chin. He tilts her face to meet his amethyst gaze and questions lightly. What troubles you? She casts her eyes downward and answers quietly. Nothing. He tips his head to the side and responds. I can feel your anguish, love. We are bonded. Don't ever forget that. Leila crawls into his lap, gripping the front of his shirt and placing a kiss on his lips. He returns the gesture calmly, searching her eyes for answers but is unable to find what he's looking for. She places pressure to his chest, pushing against him and causing him to lie back on the ground. Her fingers find the buttons to his red shirt and quickly begin undoing them. Ezra grasps her hands and states with a raised brow, You're in quite the mood. You really should be training. She leans in, sucking on his neck and earning a suppressed groan from him. Leila gently trails kisses down his chest, nipping at his hardened nipples. His hands swiftly grip her hips, flipping her so that she's pinned beneath him with narrowed eyes. He states firmly, Training, Leila, or tell me your problems. She puffs her lips in a pout and remarks, This is hopeless. Ezra sighs, releasing her and standing. He holds out a hand to help her up, and she questions jokingly, Sure we can't just stay on the ground and make out for a while? He chuckles, shaking his head and answering, We really must work on controlling your light, Leila. She sighs, facing her palms outwards and responds in defeat, Fine. Ezra stands behind her, holding her waist and whispering in her ear, Good girl. Now focus on bringing the light forth. Be gentle like a calm river. She closes her eyes, doing as told, concentrating intensely. She had to do this. She had to get the light to pour forth. Holding her breath for several seconds, her eyes snap open as she feels a tug on her chest. Pressing forward on her palms, she tries her best to summon the light, a small white orb forming in her grasp for a second before dispersing into thin air. A heavy exhale escapes her. She questions, fuming with the outcome. Why can't I summon it like before? I could always get at least a spark before, and now I barely feel a tingle. What changed? Ezra kisses her cheek and answers solemnly. My guess is your body's reaction to that dark light when Ryu showed up. You've had these effects since that night, yes? Leila nods her head slowly as she thinks on it. Yes, but would that really do so much to me? Ezra shrugs. It could, depending on what that light was. You said you desired for your foes to be destroyed, right? A frown forms on her lips. She answers weakly, attempting to turn and face him, but he holds her still. I wanted you all and the guests to be safe. I felt so much pain when it happened. I remember my arms turning black and passing out. Yes, when we found you there were dark blotches all over your body, and you were unconscious, fading in and out. I was worried. He responds, fingers tracing smooth patterns into her hips. Leila's cheeks redden slightly, and she remarks quietly, I remember faint voices. Before she can say anything further, Ezra presses lightly, Focus on training, Leila. She huffs, narrowing her honey brown eyes and counters, It's hard to focus when you're taunting me. Think of it as a lesson. Things are bound to draw your attention away. Focus on bringing forth your power while being distracted. He replies, hands running up her sides and applying light pressure on her neck. He nips her flesh, and Leila's legs tighten as she fights the urge to turn in his grasp. Not that he'd let her if she tried, though. Ezra's fingers trace down her spine, leaving her tingling. She blinks and takes a breath. She focuses on her palms and feeling the energy throughout her body. She felt the channel flooding through her, but she needed a way to break the dam down. Leila holds her hands up as though she is going to play the violin. Her mind flutters as she thinks of the music ringing through her ears on the melodic instrument. A melody brought on by strife thrums throughout her mind. The rising of the notes creates the grasp she needs to find the light. Her spirit follows the tug of energy, a crack in the large black dam. She plucks the air, scratching a piece of the dam in her mind. Ezra releases her, sensing the presence of her energy coming to life. He watches as sparks flitter in her hands. He takes her wrists and forces her palms to her front. She pauses for a moment in her actions, but he quickly states, ushering her to continue her practice. Keep going. Try not to focus on where your hands are. Leila gives a small nod. She reaches out into the darkness of the room, her mind wandering back to the musical notes. The voice of the violin gathers and rises up in victory. She can feel it. She forces the energy to her palms and opens her eyes slowly, staring at the vibrant light flowing between her hands. Glancing at Ezra, her lips are suddenly covered by his own, the light dispersing into small embers in the air. He responds as he pulls away with a warm smile. You broke through. Leila gives him a small grin and nod and replies, I guess so. Chapter 43. What now? She sits against the brick wall, watching with honey-brown eyes as the two men spar using weapons. Metal clashes against metal, creating sparks at every hard contact. Haley sits next to the woman and murmurs with fascinated eyes, I wish he'd fight me like that. Leila frowns and replies quietly, it's probably good he doesn't. Haley elbows the woman lightly in the side and counters, I'm supposed to be fighting against vampires. I've got to keep up with them if I'm gonna do that. Of course she was right. But Leila still didn't like the thought of her friend and roommate fending off rogue creatures of the night. She sighs, leaning forward with her hand holding up her chin. This is boring, she mumbles. Haley stretches out and responds, well, guarding you isn't the most active thing, especially when we're here in this castle. Leila sighs, waving a hand and a gentle strand of light flowing from the motion. She responds as she continues to play with the manifested glow. We've been at this for a month and still there's been no signs of those creatures or Ryu. That doesn't mean he's not out there, Leila. Haley swiftly counters. She pulls her knees to her chest, resting her head upon them and adds, we can't just wander about the place either. Who knows what could happen? Rising to her feet, she growls in frustration. Ezra inquires as he notices her antsy pacing. Leaving love. She huffs, placing her hands on her hips. I need to be alone. Before anyone can stop her or protest, she leaves the circular training room and paces down the halls anxiously. She could feel it in her chest. Ryu was planning something, but she didn't know what. Was his goal truly to restore eternal night? And if that was the case, what would happen to life that thrived upon the sunlight? Would it just die? Would those creatures be set loose as well and feast upon whomever they wished once their cage was broken? No. Leila shakes her head. She couldn't afford to think that way. Even if Ryu somehow managed to restore the night, there was always some way to reverse it, or at least that's what she kept telling herself. She had to fight to foil whatever plans Ryu had going, but he was nowhere to be seen. In an entire month since that interrupted date night, there hadn't been a sign of any more beasts, rogue vampires or Ryu. It didn't sit well with the woman, not in the slightest. She sighs begrudgingly. There has to be something. A firm grasp to her shoulder startles her, and she whips around in surprise to find Ryu standing there with a smirk upon his features. Alone at last. She swings a fist at the man, but he catches the bald appendage and frowns. My prey is no longer frightened by me, it seems. Leila spits angrily as he spins her around and tugs her frame into his own, his fangs hovering above her neck. What do you want, you brute? It appears we need to have a chat. She scoffs and hisses out as she tries to elbow the man in the gut only to have her arm restrained by him. Oh yeah? And here I thought you wanted to treat me to a nice dinner. He bites out irritably. Your sarcasm is not needed, Weapon. I require your blood for a little ceremony. Still, she squirms in his hold and replies defensively. You think I'm going to just hand it over to you? He chuckles cold and hollow. You're assuming that I'm asking for your permission. I'm here to take you, make you my own, through force if necessary, and have what I've desired for so long. There just wasn't a weapon strong enough to pull it off quite yet, but you've proven yourself worthy. Before he can do any harm to her, she whips her head forward then back, bashing him in the nose, earning a resonating crunch and swear. His hold on her slackens, and she bursts into a sprint, taking several turns down long corridors in hopes of finding her way back to the three in the training room. Her feet carry her until she rams into a familiar and firm figure. She glances up at Ezra and points down the hall she had just come from. Ryu. He's here. He frowns and questions. Are you certain, Leila? I'm not sensing any presence besides your own right now. As she goes to make a retort, a loud boom and shaking rattles the two. Leila's eyes widen and she blurts. Was that an explosion? Where did it come from? How big was it if we felt it here? Ezra scowls, pulling the woman to his backside and states calmly, Stay behind me at all times, Leila. She nods, gently grasping the back of his shirt to show him that she understood the command. Following on his heels, they make their way towards the smoke billowing from a portion of the castle. Once they arrive, rubble greets them along with ash from dead vampires. Confusion mars her face. While the explosion itself was rather large, it was out of place, located at the dungeons of the castle. A light bulb flickers and she asks curiously, You don't think that was for the old man, do you? A firm but distinguishable voice states from behind, startling Leila. If it was, then he's as good as dead. No human would survive that. Even vampires lie scattered about in ashes among this mess. Her eyes gloss over for a moment, but she rapidly shakes her head. She would not mourn the loss of the man who abandoned her, and also wanted her dead. She refused to give in to that emotional side of her. Instead, she focused on the rubble. But why here? Mamoru glares at the grounds below, but Ryu's voice echoes in the air, beating him to it. Because, dear sweet weapon, this is another spot for releasing the glyphs that will bring eternal darkness. Leila shakes her head with a deep frown. I don't understand why though. Why do all of this? For what purpose could you need it to be perpetually dark? Mamoru's eyes narrow and he answers calmly. The throne. Leila turns to him. What? But you already have claim to that. How's that make any sense? Ezra nods his head in understanding and responds. Ah, so this is another ploy at taking the king's seat. Ryu appears seemingly from thin air and smirks. This time I will succeed though, and none of you, except that weapon you hold so dear, will live to see it to the end. Ezra scowls. He fashions a long javelin made of ice and hurls it through the air without second thought, landing a direct hit into Ryu's frame. His figure collapses into ash, and laughter echoes about the area. Frustrated, Ezra? You'll have your chance to fight me again soon enough. Don't worry about that. I'll be seeing you soon, Leila. She cringes. She didn't like the way her name rolled off his tongue. She never wanted to hear him say it again. Her attention drifts between the king and Ezra, and she finally asks, noticing her missing friend. Where's Haley and what now? Chapter 44. Pulling strings. Leila examines the glyph quietly since the rubble from the explosion was quickly removed by servants. Haley approaches the girl, and she questions without looking up. Where were you? The younger female answers swiftly as she places her hands on her hips. I was looking for information on the vampires. Turns out they're not very keen on sharing their history with humans. Leila looks up with a tilt of her head and asks, why not just ask your boyfriend about that then? I'm sure he wouldn't mind going over that with you. Haley's cheeks redden for a moment, and she turns away with her arms folded over in embarrassment. She coughs and responds, yes, well, I didn't want to bother him with something I could gather on my own. Leila giggles and counters, seems like you've hit a roadblock instead though. You might as well ask him. Ask who what? Leila waves to the man as he appears behind Haley, wrapping his arms around her waist and nuzzling her neck. She blushes and replies sheepishly, I was just searching for information on the past. Mamoru kisses her neck and responds, oh? What would you like to know? Leila glances away and replies, she wanted to learn the history of your people. And what of you, weapon? He inquires calmly. Leila puts her hands on her hips and states, I'm here for the present and future. Tell me, where is Ezra now? He shrugs. I sent him on an errand. I need him to check the sites of all the known glyphs and whether or not they've been activated. Should eternal night come to pass, rogue vampires and foul creatures alike will overrun your human realm. A frown paints her face, and she traces a hand over the marking etched into the stone. Do you know how these glyphs are activated? It seems Ryu has some idea, but I'm not sure how exactly. Do you wish to trigger this one? Both women look to the man in confusion. Leila sputters, placing a hand over her chest in offense. Why would I want to do that? I'm curious about the thing, yes, but I'm not willing to put the lives of literally millions of people on the line. He rolls his eyes and remarks, then you'll have to do your best to stay away from these sites. All it takes is a small sample of your power, and that could activate the glyph with no problem. You're not the first weapon to go through this, and I highly doubt you'll be the last. Haley pipes in. So you're saying this has happened more than once? Why haven't you gotten rid of the means for this to occur in the first place then? Mamoru huffs and responds, we've tried that. The last weapon who attempted to get rid of the glyphs died in his fight to do so. How? Leila questions curiously. He pinches the bridge of his nose, seemingly in frustration, and answers, the summoning. You'll recall your father mentioned it upon his objection to your blood donation. Leila nods her head slowly, her eyes narrowing at the mention of the man. Mamoru continues simply, this summoning would turn the blood weapon into a creature far more powerful than those coming through the glyphs. The beast would then use its own life force as a means to seal the ancient symbols. This in turn would bring a calm end to the storm. The frown continues to pull at her lips and she pries, I'm sensing that there is a but in there somewhere. The last weapon isn't still alive, so something must have happened. My brother ripped its heart out before the process could be completed, so the seals were never fully restored in the first place. You coming back to us alive and not fully maimed when you had was because Ryu wanted you returned that way. He is cruel, as I'm sure you've noticed, and probably up to no good. She sighs, folding her arms over, and replies, I figured that much when I first came here. You don't plan on doing the summoning, do you? He places a hand to his chest. You have my word. Now, if you'll excuse us, I apparently have a history lesson to teach. Leila bobs her head as Mamoru takes Haley's hand and drags the woman away from the scene. Leila stands there with a small smile before she turns back to the ruins in front of her. It would only take the smallest amount of energy from her to trigger the glyph. Was that his plan? Have her activate all of the glyphs? Surely he knew she wouldn't do it on her own. Ryu was no fool, and the king. He had told her flat out how to make the spell trigger. Was it something he wanted? She shakes her head and sighs. Dwelling on the thoughts would only suffice to give her a pounding headache. She turns her back to the ruins and walks off, returning to her shared room with Ezra. Her eyes scan the chamber, and she exhales once more. He still wasn't there. She crawls into bed alone and tucks herself beneath the warmth of the blankets. Closing her eyes, she drifts off to sleep. Words drift in and out. Voices unfamiliar to the woman draw her attention. A figure wearing a black cloak with a hood obscuring their face from view stands there, finger pointing towards a vaguely familiar location. Leila stares at the bell tower in confusion. What is she supposed to gain from this? Her eyes scan the colossal structure before her. A child waits at the top, teetering on the edge, holding their hands out for balance as they walk back and forth across the top. Their eyes stare down at Leila, and they stop their motions. They stand at the edge and lean over before dropping without a second thought. Leila covers her face as a scream is ripped from her. A gentle hand pulls her palm from her eyes, and she stares into ruby spheres. The small girl states with a grin as she holds out an instrument, Play for me. Leila hesitates, but she eventually relents and takes the violin and bow from the child. It was just her size. She places the instrument to her chin as it rests against her shoulder and begins to play. The music flows and light glows as she pours her heart into a playful rhythm. The bow bounces across the strings and strikes down and up in abrupt stops. Then long notes follow, slowing the pace of the song until she comes back to the bridge, her bow gliding over mid-tones. The child's eyes brighten with malicious delight at the sight, and before long she states as Leila comes to a languid stop, Thank you, blood weapon. The eternal night draws closer. She startles awake at the sound of a familiar voice calling her name and collapses onto the bed. Leila runs a hand through her hair and questions as she finds those amethyst eyes staring at her with concern. What happened? Before Ezra can speak, Haley rushes in and remarks, You were floating, Leila, surrounded by light. Mamoru and I followed part of the trail here. Her eyes widen and she turns to Ezra asking, What happened? He shakes his head and answers calmly, The glyph here at the palace has been activated. What? But how? I was sleeping. She spits immediately. Ezra sighs and responds, You were lured during your rest. Can you recall anything? Leila frowns. Yeah, This kid was on the bell tower at the campus. She asked me to play. Oh no. Ezra drags a hand down his face. He replies, That must be where the last glyph is then. Ryu has manipulated you in your sleep. Leila asks weakly, He can do that? Mamoru nods. He can. One of the previous weapons had the ability to influence others through the dream state. Her eyes narrow in frustration and she quips, How many weapons has he sampled? Ezra answers immediately, Enough, but it seems he's been unsuccessful with your power. She pulls the covers from her frame and goes to stand. Leila states as she runs a hand through her hair, We have to go to the campus. Chapter 45, Splitting Up. Chaos greets them on the other side of the portal. Leila's eyes widen at the sight. Students are fleeing the campus as monsters and bloodthirsty vampires run rampant. The sky is a deep and dark vermilion red. Small lights falling from above and crashing into one of the many burning or destroyed buildings. She quietly questions, taking Ezra's hand in her own out of fear. What happened here? Did I do this? Mamoru speaks up before the second man gets a chance to answer. Eternal night is falling upon us. It would seem you're quite the power source, weapon. She glares at the man and counters. That's not a reassuring thing. A creature with several sets of eyes spots the group idling in the courtyard and charges at them with its centipede-like body. Ezra forms a thin sword of ice and readies himself to fight the beast. He dashes in front of the group and makes several slashes, slicing the monster into many parts, blue blood spurting about. He doesn't face the party and states coolly, My lord, your orders. The rubied vampire narrows his orbs at the sight before him and responds firmly, his index finger pointing outwards towards the chaos. Take the weapon with you and find Ryu. Kill him this time, Ezra. Haley and I will help the humans. Without another word, Ezra grasps Leila's hand, and they head towards the bell tower first. Mamoru turns to Haley and questions, "Are you ready?" She nods her head firmly and follows him as they storm the cult center of the campus first, flames licking at their heels. A student rushes towards the two, and Haley quickly pauses their fleeing steps, questioning, "Are there any more students inside?" The young male's eyes widen and he blurts, "I don't know. I came from the 3rd floor. This is insane." Before she can get another word in, the man brushes past her and continues his escape. A loud roar resonates through the air. A beast similar to that of a large lion with wings drops down to the ground before them. Mamoru puts an arm in front of Haley and states, "Go check the other floors. I'll deal with this beast and find you when I'm done here." She hesitates and asks, "You're certain?" Mamoru nods and shoves the woman towards the ramp leading up to the higher floors. He orders quickly, "Go now and take this." He tosses her a silver dagger and turns his back to her. Without another word she bolts up the ramp, scouring for students. She steps through a broken glass door, leading to the 2nd floor where the campus store and food court sat. Memories flash throughout her mind as she recalls finding Leila there her first official day on campus. She breathes out to herself, "Things were so much simpler then." Footsteps rush her from behind, but she whips around in time to land a kick against the attacker's chest. She glances at the form and notices as the figure slinks back up as if possessed. Haley holds the dagger close with narrowed eyes as the vampire rushes her once more. She dodges a swipe aimed at her head and lashes at the woman with her dagger, striking across her arm. The vampire howls in pain, stopping its assault on Haley. Its pupils constrict as she glares at Haley. "Hunter!" It mutters just loud enough for Haley to hear. The young woman stiffens for a brief second before commenting, "Yeah, I am. What of it?" A piercing screech shatters the girl's hearing for several moments, her free hand grasping her head at the pain searing her mind from the vampire's scream. Several more figures appear, and the night creature points at the girl. She grins maliciously and states, "Hunter, kill." Without a second to breathe, the forms charge Haley. She dodges their onslaught and takes off in a bolt, attempting to shake some of them off her trail. She couldn't fight them all at once. Ducking behind a door, she holds the dagger to her chest, ready to strike the first chance she had. Footsteps stop just outside the room she hid herself in. A masculine and gruff voice calls out menacingly, "I can smell you, little girl." Haley inhales a sharp breath and waits as the door opens before pouncing on the vampire and stabbing him straight in the heart. She stumbles back as she rips the dagger away and watches as he crumbles into ash. A hand taps her from behind, and she whips around ready to slice the neck of the assailant. Haley's actions halt, though, as she gazes into the eyes of a frightened student. "A survivor? You need to get out of here." She immediately responds, lowering her guard. Tears swell in the student's eyes and she swiftly counters, "How? The whole place is crawling with those things. I watched them bite one of the students and they changed." Haley stares at the female student in confusion. "Changed how?" She whispers as she shuts the door as quiet as she can. "I don't. They started biting others. Like a virus. Do you know what's going on? I mean, you just killed one of those things." Haley shakes her head and comments with narrowed eyes, "No, are there any others or just you?" The female shakes her dark locks, wringing her hands. Haley exhales. This didn't sit right with her. She blatantly states, "You're a vampire." Her blue eyes widen in shock, and she quickly responds before Haley can ready the dagger for a fatal blow. "I am, but please wait. I'm not one of Ryu's followers. King Mamoru promised these grounds to vampire students. I swear it." Haley scowls and covers the woman's mouth with her hand. "Hush unless you want those beasts to find you." A high-pitched scream fills the air, startling the two women. Haley snatches the hand of the student and pulls her deeper into the partially destroyed room until they reach large windows shining red moonlight inside on the opposite side. She questions, "You can survive a 2-story jump, right?" The woman stares at her with wide eyes. "What? No, that's just movie stuff. Those that can do that are stronger than my class." Haley runs a hand through her locks, frustration filling her. The doorknob jiggles for several seconds, both women stilling at the motion. Another moment later, Haley pulls the girl with her behind some of the debris, trying to obscure their frames as the door is ripped off its hinges. A thin, sickly gray beast with wings on its back and one pair of golden eyes bursts into the room, sniffing the ground, a collar and leash wrapped securely around its neck. Haley whispers hurriedly, "They're hunting me." I'll make an escape. You take it and get out of here as fast as you can. The king is here. She nods her head in understanding. Haley steps out from her spot and rushes the creature first before it can get the chance to react. She drives her dagger down into its neck, dragging it upward and slicing its head off. Blue blood similar to the beast Ezra killed spurting out as the monster falls over dead. Haley reacts without thinking and tackles the vampire to the ground that had entered the room with the strange creature, and stabs them in the heart. She snaps loudly at the vampire student. Get out of here now. Another scream wails throughout the building, and a large explosion destroys the wall. Her body is flung from the crash as a blinding light fills the room. The female student quickly pulls Haley from the debris. She coughs as the smoke begins to clear and reveals the screaming woman from before. The angry vampire snatches up the student by the throat, and Haley snaps as she jumps to her feet, swaying for a second as the blood rushes to her head. Not that one. She charges at the woman, who grins maliciously, tossing the girl to the side. She hisses, ice filling her voice. I will skin you alive, huntress. Chapter 46. Can you take it? The metal of the dagger clashes against a blade of air. The vampire had merely jumped back with a small cackle. This was not good for Haley. The woman before her screeches again, causing Haley to stumble and grasp her ears to block out the noise. She dodges another hurl of wind blown her direction, small cuts appearing on her arms. The vampiress smirks and replies, Let me introduce myself, pathetic huntress. I am Lady Irene, one of the 12 seats belonging to the king's round table. Confusion mars her face. Then why the hell are you trying to kill me? Her eyes narrow. You worthless human and our king are not worthy of your titles. Lord Ryu will reign supreme at the end of this conflict, and you'll be the livestock you were meant to be. Haley scowls and states with a mock bow. That didn't answer my question, oh villainous supreme. Angry hues of jade rush to her front, and Haley blocks the fist meant for her face with a quick sidestep. She pivots on her right heel with a leg raised and aims for the vampiress, knocking her back into debris. A growl escapes the woman, and she lashes a clawed hand at the huntress, wind following in its trail, landing a solid blow to Haley's chest. Blood drips from her mouth, but she rises to her feet, standing tall. She would not let this woman have her way. Arms snatch her own on either side of her, causing her dagger to drop to the ground, and she whips her head back and forth to see who had grabbed her. The vampires who held her were disfigured, as though they had been a part of the explosion and risen from the dead rather than turned into ash. They growled lowly, salivating at her exposed flesh. Irene's pale hand reaches for Haley's face, but she turns her head away, giving her a cheek instead. Her claws dig into her flesh and she states, I want to watch you suffer. Haley spits, baring her teeth at her. Well, you're gonna have to try harder than some stupid intimidation tactic. Her hand glides across Haley's cheek, leaving a red imprint on her flesh. Haley scowls and squirms, trying to free herself from the grasp of the two vampires holding her. I'm going to enjoy draining the blood from you. With practiced skill, Haley flings her head back and into the face of Irene, hearing a familiar crunch as the woman wails, causing her captors to loosen their hold. Haley rips free and dives for the dagger before going for the legs of the two henchmen, and then their hearts with two quick slices. She charges Irene and tackles the woman to the floor, jabbing the dagger into her head first, blood spurting from the wound as she rips the weapon away and plunges it into her chest next. Haley watches as she squirms for several moments before going still. She yanks the dagger out once more and rises to her feet. Turning on her heels, she expected the female student to be long gone by now, but there she hid, tucked behind some of the fallen debris. Haley approaches her in her blood-soaked form and states, You were supposed to leave. Her head was down and she answers quietly, I was afraid to. The wind howls around them, pulling towards Irene's body. Haley rotates and stares in shock as her body recovers, and she's standing there with a heated glare pointed directly at Haley. Haley is the first to react. She shoves the student out of the way and takes a clawed blow to her injured chest, flying back into a wall, nearly knocking her unconscious. She attempts to take a breath, but the air is pulled from her lungs. She can feel herself choking as her body searches desperately for oxygen. A hand encircles her neck and begins to strangle her, adding to the pressure and dizziness swimming through her mind. She flails about, bucking her hips and shaking the woman off of her. She throws a fist to Irene's face, but it's quickly caught and Haley's hand is forced backwards until a resonating pop causes her to scream. Blood dripped from Irene's upper lip. I'm going to enjoy this. Mamoru swings his blade at the large chimera, its dragon-like tail swaying as it rotates its massive body to dodge the sword and swipes at the fast vampire. He growls in frustration. The vampire king found himself struggling to get rid of the creature. Had it been so long since he had last dealt with such a beast? Had he grown weak in his rest? Another scream interrupts his musings. This one was the sound of his treasure. The only sign of him having heard the noise was the flare his nostrils and his ruby eyes deepening in color. He had to get to her. A talon strikes the man across the abdomen, leaving a large wound. He hisses in pain. He had definitely become weak with time. He narrows his eyes at the winged creature and glides his hand over his blade, smoldering flames licking its surface. He glares at the beast and states irritably, "I will not fall to some hell fiend like you." He leaps into the air, blade at the ready, and brings it down upon the chimera, dragging it through one of its 3 animal heads. The creature roars in agony and fury, but Mamoru gives it no time to recover, making several slashes through the air and decapitating each one of its heads. With the chimera dealt with, he launches off, dealing any rogue vampires or creatures in his way fatal blows as he continues towards the screaming until it ceases. His insides still. He had to find her. Jumping over fallen debris, he plows his way through the decaying building until he comes across her body. A young vampire sits beside her, cradling her head in her lap and pointing towards a corpse. The head of Irene lies there on the ground. His eyes widen, and he quickly lifts Haley into his arms, earning a strained cough from her bloodied form. Still breathing then. That's good. Her skin is cold to touch and she weakly replies, "I'm dying, aren't I?" Mamoru shakes his head and rapidly answers, giving the student a nod of appreciation. "No, you will not die." Haley chokes out a laugh and answers softly, "You're a poor liar, my king. Leila isn't around to fix this time." Realization slaps the man in the face, and he carries Haley to a nearby table, placing her on it with hurried gentleness. Mamoru clamps down onto his wrist, blood opening from the wound, and he holds the appendage out to Haley. "Drink. Your friend's power is my own." She stares at him through half-lidded eyes and nods, taking hold of his wrist and lightly drinking the metallic liquid. She pushes his arm away and replies weakly, "No offense, but blood tastes disgusting." He chuckles and responds, leaning close to her, "If you're well enough to make jokes, you're well enough to live, Haley." She states quietly, "You didn't tell me I would have to decapitate anyone." Mamoru points to the student and commands, "Go. The way is safe for now." The young woman nods her head swiftly and bows, "Thank you, my king and huntress." She sprints off and Mamoru turns to Haley, leaning over her frame and examining her slowly healing wounds. He frowns and questions, "Why is it not working?" Haley answers, "Ezra bit me the first time her blood entered my body. Maybe the bite is a catalyst." Mamoru's frown deepens, but he finally exhales and answers, "Do you think you can withstand my bite?" She nods her head.